Hi, everybody. Oh, I'm going to take this off. I'm alone back here. It's Kira, teen librarian at Rawlings, and today's my book talk. Excuse me. So, I actually found this book just while browsing the shelves, the YA section, which I do happen to do when I have a few free minutes. Just add to that to be read pile, But it is actually fitting because it is Asian American Pacific Islander Month and it is Pride Month. And these two come together in this book. Before I get started, I just want to talk about, there's been some criticism of the book in terms of the lack of character development. And I can understand that, but it's also primarily about its main character, and it has some sort of negative characters that are just negative, and you get to learn a little bit about them. But the other thing is the main character is a teenager, and he's a teenager in a really, really tough spot, and he makes some decisions that aren't entirely wise, but I don't think that makes him less believable. And there are times when you don't like him, but I think that reflects something about his history and his character. So I'm going to tell you what it is. It's called Money Boy. It's by Paul Yee. And I think this got a Stonewall honor. It didn't win the Stonewall Prize, but I think it got an honor. So it's about Ray, and it's from his perspective, which is important. So Ray is a teenager who has immigrated to Canada with his father, Ba, and his stepmother, Yang, and his stepbrother, John. And he didn't want to come to Canada. He didn't want to go. He wanted to stay in China. He was happy in China. He had friends. He was doing gymnastics. And yet his mother basically told him he had to go. And his mother and father had split up, and he has some suspicions about his mother, but he absolutely adored his grandfather, which is important to know. And so his father is sort of, he's definitely verbally abusive, and he just demands things, and he's completely unlikable, and he's a hypocrite. But they're putting a lot of pressure on Ray and on John, his stepbrother, to do well in school and go to college and become doctors, all that sort of stuff. Now, John does a lot better. Again, they didn't grow up as brothers. And they have a bunch of friends who are, Chinese Canadian, who do better in school. But Ray really doesn't do well in school. His English is not very good. A lot of his friends had sort of English tutors from a young age back in China. He didn't have any of that. He's sort of starting at the bottom and trying to learn as fast as he can, but then he's trying to be in classes where he needs to have that English and he doesn't have it, and then he becomes self-conscious. He's very self-conscious about being a Chinese immigrant and how he's reflecting on Chinese people coming in future, and he doesn't want to, play into stereotypes. But anyway, he has a really hard time with English. He hasn't learned that much yet, and so he doesn't do very well in school. And he was super into gymnastics. He's like fit and lean, but his father has no interest in trying to find any way for him to continue doing gymnastics in Canada. Whereas his stepbrother is sort of more typically athletic. So, he's good at just the regular games people play. So he's got this stepbrother who's really successful, and they're close. They're not, rivals. It's just hard when he's doing well and Ray is struggling. But the most important part, not most important, but a critical part of Ray's identity is that he's gay and in the closet. And he suspects that most of his friends would react positively, but he thinks like his stepbrother's girlfriend is Christian, and he's seen her sort of doing things at Pride, or her church group doing things at Pride. He thinks that she would just call him a sinner and stuff like that. And definitely, he's definitely not like his father. No way, So the culture that he was raised in, it's not only homophobic, but there's a specific kind of homophobia to it, which he has. He's acculturated to, right? So he has his own homophobia, and he wishes he were straight. It would make things easier for him. But he's tried it. He tries to act like the other guys and get and feel excited at certain things, and he just doesn't. So his life is not very happy, and his favorite thing to do is play this MMORPG game, Rebel State, on his computer. Now, this game is set in China, and you play in Chinese, and his avatar is named Steel, who is like a badass warrior, and he's got two companions that are under his control. There's Long Range, the Archer, and Monkey. And so he's kicked ass in this. He's done really well in this game. And he works hard to earn honor points and strength points. And he is also able to get people to follow him in this game. So he feels like he can be himself in this game, right? He can demonstrate leadership and persuasion, and other players follow him. And he's determined to sort of fight for the right side in this ongoing war in the game. And it's sort of his safe place. He gets in trouble a lot from his father because his father says, you play that too much and you don't study. But it's the place where he really feels at home. So given the sort of situation that he's in, to say that he's addicted to this game, he probably is, but you can understand why. And so the other thing is that he seems sort of younger than his years, and in large part that's because when they got to Canada, Ba and Nyang, his stepmother, who's a badass, by the way, runs her business, does everything in her business. Ba claims to run this business, but he doesn't. His business failed because he was a personal trainer, and all he would do was yell at people. And his clients were these rich Chinese people who wanted to be pampered, and so they all dropped him. So that business failed. So now he helps with her business, but she is really smart and really gets stuff done. But there is the sense that they're sort of treated like toddlers in Canada. And so there's that sense, and there's also this sense of his being in the closet, having absorbed all of this homophobia, sort of a specific kind of homophobia that you see later in the book. So anyway, at one point his father has called him to do something, and he's like, I'll be there in a minute, because he's playing Rebel State, and it's this critical moment in Rebel State where he's like led this argument, he's trying to get people over on his side, and his father's just like, oh, that stupid game, do you want me to rip that cord out of the wall? And so he's like, okay, and like, so he comes out to help him, and then later his father comes in with a laptop, and on his browsing history, are these gay sites, some of which are sort of giving advice about how to come out. And I mean, they're not like sexy sites. I mean, there may have been some, it doesn't specify, but there definitely were some sites like giving advice about how to come out. And his father basically just takes all of his clothes, his bags, and just throws them on the lawn. And he realizes his father is throwing him out because he's gay. And he's furious. So he packs a bag with clothes and his laptop, and he heads for downtown Toronto. He realizes he doesn't have his iPod, so he like puts his earphones in just so that he doesn't look. He thinks it looks weird to just ride without your earphones in. So there's this weird sort of self-consciousness that's a little immature, sort of running throughout. But I think it's kind of a little bit annoying. And the way Ray judges people can be quite irritating. He kind of reminds me of Holden Caulfield, where there is a lot that you identify with, but there's also like, oh, come on, come on. Like he gets on my nerves, but The Catcher in the Rye is still a great book, even if Holden Caulfield gets on my nerves, So anyway, so he wants to go to the gay neighborhood in Toronto, which he's never been to before. He's heard about it. And so he goes down and he goes into this coffee shop and gets on Rebel State, and he's playing Rebel State so he can feel safe and calm. And so he stows his laptop in this magazine rack where you can't really see it. And then he has to spend his first night on the street, homeless. And he wakes up with a knife against his throat, being robbed. So he gets his wallet, his phone, and his watch all taken. Losing your phone is huge, especially since, he doesn't know if his father's trying to call him to tell him to come home. He can't be in touch with his friends. I mean, it's huge. Everything in a sense is in your phone. And, he loses his wallet. So he loses his ID, he loses his debit card, loses access to almost $400 he saved that he has in the bank. And so he goes and he does still have the laptop, but all of his clothes are also strewn all over the alley, all dirty. So he puts them back in, and he goes and he gets his laptop. And then he has change. He goes to the bank because he wants to get his money out. He doesn't have his debit card. And he can't get it out because he doesn't have an ID. He doesn't have the card, but he also never established the account with his own signature. His stepmother did. So she needs to sign for him to get the money out. So he's stuck. He doesn't have any money. He can't access the money without going and getting her help, which he doesn't want to do. He doesn't want to be in contact with his family. They threw him out. So very frustrated, he calls his stepbrother and he asks him to meet him. So when he sees him, first of all, he eats. He's starving, so he eats, and his stepbrother Jung is like, "You need to come home." And clearly, Ba has not explained what happened, that he kicked him out. Right? He's said something else, said something about he was playing too much of this game or something. And so John doesn't know what actually happened, but he's trying to get him to come home. And so with that, Ray's heard about this shelter. So he goes to the shelter and he's able to wash his clothes at the shelter. They have free meals. They're showing a movie, but he hates it there. And he basically is kind of looking down his nose. He sees these people and he sees them as failures. And I think that's also a part of his culturation. But he's quite obnoxious. Not that everyone there's great to him. It's not an easy place to be. People are having all kinds of troubles when they end up in shelters. But, he's pretty, he doesn't really express it in words to them, but he's pretty snotty. So he can't sleep. He's exhausted, but he can't sleep because his roommates are loud sleepers and they're farting loudly, and it's just a kind of a creepy place for him. So he doesn't really sleep. And the day he went in, they asked for ID, and he said, "Well, I lost my wallet." And so when he goes back and talks to the lady, she's like, because he doesn't have anything, he has to go to Chinatown to deal with it, and he just doesn't even want to think about that. He didn't actually have the equivalent of a social security number in Canada so that he could get a job, right? When they first came, he sort of refused to do the paperwork. Oh, my computer just came unplugged. One sec. This is what happens when you move your legs around a lot. So he doesn't actually have that. She has all that information, which is a big problem because he needs to get a job. And he can't get a job without this. But again, he's not going back there. And so he at least still has his computer, right? And now he's got some money. That makes him feel better. Let me just make sure I'm... He also calls his mother in China, who you've already gotten the sense is not a great mom. But he's hoping that she will fly him back to China. He wants to go back to China. And it's a odd conversation. She sort of promises to send him money, but she's changing the subject constantly. And then she says, "Oh, you should come for New Year's." And he gets so excited and he's like, "Yes, yes, yes." And then she says, "Oh, no, I have to visit my mother. I haven't seen her in so long." And basically says, "No, you can't come." And also she doesn't know what year in school he is. She doesn't know anything about him. And he's just sort of brokenhearted, angry, disappointed, etc. And she has never been very reliable, and he calls her again when he checks into the now that he has money in his pocket. He decides that he's going to go and stay in the hospital, which will make him feel better. He calls her again. And this time, it's very early in the morning there. She wakes up sleepy or sounds weird. And then this guy gets on the phone and just hangs up. And then his suspicion that his mother is a prostitute is essentially confirmed. And he knows she's not going to send him money. And she's not going to fly him home to China. And he's heartbroken by it and angry that she's just sort of handed him off to Ba, like, just take him, you know? And the worst part is he also goes to Chinatown to get something to eat because they have really cheap food. So he gets something to eat, he comes back, and the door he had locked to his hostel room is open. And he goes in, and the laptop that was under his pillow is gone. And he freaks out about this. I mean, that's his connection to Rebel State. That is his connection to his safe place that he loves. And so he freaks out pretty badly. And he goes out and starts screaming at the clerk, and the clerk points, there's a sign very clearly that says the hostel is not responsible for your property when you're here. And he feels terrible. So he then goes back to Church Street, which is the gay neighborhood in Toronto. And he first sees what he calls money boys, because that's the translation of the Chinese term. Essentially, young male sex workers. And he, starts considering it. He's like, well, it's in my blood. I don't want to be a virgin anymore. I want to be out, et cetera, et cetera. And he's standing there for a while. And then the cops come, so everybody runs. But he goes back out again. He goes back. I guess he spends that. I don't really remember the timeline here, but he goes back out again. I don't know. He goes. Maybe the next day he goes into this sushi and karaoke bar that is called Rainbow Sushi, and it's Chinese owned. And the waiter is dreamy, right? And Ray is sort of fantasizing about like having this guy as a boyfriend, and so he decides, I'm going to impress him. I'm going to order the most expensive stuff on the menu, and then I'm going to leave a big tip. And as you're reading, you're like, this is not wise. You don't have very much money, but at the same time, you can sort of identify with that like aching, like wanting something good. And so he orders all this stuff, and then the owner is Chen, is this very friendly, effeminate Chinese man, gay man, who comes over and sits and chats with him. And this is where we see Ray's own homophobia, because he doesn't understand. Chen, is wearing makeup, and is very effeminate, done up, and Ray just doesn't understand it at all. He's like, I never wanted to wear girls' clothes, and he's just like, this guy is just a weirdo freak. But he's actually a really kind guy. And so anyway, he keeps chatting to him, and Ray's just like, where's the waiter, whose name is Lawrence? And, after he's ordered all this, he actually finds out that Chen and Lawrence are married. So he totally, spent all this money for no reason. But he sort of does make friends with them. And the music they're playing in there is his favorite music, too. So it's kind of an amazing place to discover. And the first time he goes in, there are no Chinese people in there. And he asks about it. It's the night of the gay Chinese potluck somewhere. So, but usually it's full of Chinese and white people. So he goes out again to Boy Street, which is where the Money Boys are. And he's nervous. He's really nervous. But the first guy who picks him up is Han. And Han, it's sort of, when you're reading, you're like, what? This is impossible, you know? Han is very kind, and he said, well, you know, I'm really hungry. Do you mind if we go get something to eat? So they're eating like this delicious Vietnamese food. And then he said, okay, I'm going to ask you kind of an embarrassing thing to do for me. And it's this sort of loaded moment. And then he says, will you go bowling with me? So they go bowling, and they're really competitive bowling, and it's weird. And then they go back to his really fancy apartment. He's like this rich guy. And Han is like really gentle, and it's just like this gentle losing of his virginity. And it's not a negative experience. Ray sleeps in. He gets up, and Han says, yeah, I want to have lunch with you. And he's like, okay, you know. It's like, this is so bad. You know, he gets paid. And so he goes back to Rainbow Sushi, and he's chatting to, you know, these people who are sort of becoming friends. And Chen actually offers him a job, but at this point he thinks being a money boy can't be that bad after this one encounter. And they're chatting, and Han comes in, and he sits with some friends. And Chen and Lawrence say, you know him? And he says, yeah. Like, stay away from him. And then they tell him he's a pimp. And then Boss shows up. And he's like screaming and shouting and telling him to go home and blah, blah, blah. And Lawrence and Chen are absolutely kind and generous with him. You know, they treat him lovely, you know, so he won't go. So he meets up with Han. So Han says, I have a job for you. And it's this horrible, I mean, it's sort of violent, but it's after Ray throws up in the elevator on the way down. He realizes that this is not, you know, not what he once thought it was. And Bob finds him again, and he tells him that his grandfather is coming, and that his grandfather wants to see him. And I don't want to tell, I just told you the whole story. I didn't mean to. But the way I've told it has sort of left out the horror of that second experience. It was really terrible. Like, it was really, he felt ill, and he just, it was horrible. And what's interesting about this book to me is that it sort of melds these two experiences, right? A lot of young people are still kicked out of their home for their sexuality or their gender identity. And they're faced with these impossible circumstances. And in this book, you have a kid kicked out of his home who has even more complicated circumstances. He comes from a different culture. He doesn't speak the language well. He doesn't know that many people outside of his small world. And he's also proud, which I'm not saying is a bad thing, but it complicates things. And he's self-conscious about coming out to his friends. And he has experienced this whole culture that we don't learn that much about, but we definitely get ideas about, I don't think the gay Chinese culture that he was aware of, didn't have diva drag queens who were celebrated, and and the sort of joy of liberation in that sense. It was sort of still very even if you weren't in the closet, you were still in a closet. But it wraps up somewhat happily, and it was a little not tied together, but I was still so relieved for a happy ending, and because it was, there was a lot of trauma that happened, but he does feel free at the end. He takes a big step, not in terms of being a money boy, but when he gets back. And I doubt it'll be easy at home, but it's not entirely clear what's going to happen. But it definitely ends with some joy, and I appreciated that. So check it out, Money Boy. It's a short book, so it doesn't take long to read, and with some more, I think I could use some more development just in terms of, but the first person, it's sort of hard to look at how, you could hear more about his life in China, and if he knew he was gay in China and what that was like, or so. There are things that could supplement our understanding of his own homophobia. But yeah, check it out. Probably told you too much about it, but I'm sorry if I did. I'm not a big fan of MMORPG. I love playing RPG, but the weird thing about the tons of people playing at the same time just freaks me out. Because when you're not playing, they are playing. That's just, I don't know. That's just weird to me. If I want to play with a lot of people, I want everyone playing at the same time, not lots of people playing at the same time and then other people playing it. I don't know. Maybe I'm just old. But it was interesting what a role that played in his life. Okay, well, that's it for me. We got a program today. If anyone wants to hang, 5:30, Turtle Park. Come on down, meet me in person. I'm feeling a little tired. I just need to eat. I'll be better, but yeah, going down, meet me in person. You can see how goofy I am, especially if I get some energy by eating. So take care of yourself in every way. Care for yourself. Sometimes it's hard to care for yourself. Sometimes it really is. But please do. Okay? We miss you. We miss having you here. We miss hanging out with you. We miss doing things with you. So, I'm going to sign off, and then I'm going to run for food because I want to yawn. Yeah, and my head's starting to hurt because it's like, food please, food please, food please. All right. Take care. Have a great weekend, and hopefully I will see you. We will get over this pandemic that is a load of poo. Yes, I just sounded like I was 4 years old. Try not to swear. Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.